Joel Goldsmith discovered something shocking about prayer that changed everything. After years of traditional prayer bringing little results, he realized most people approach prayer completely backwards. They beg, plead, and ask for things as if God doesn't already know what they need. The mystic revealed that true prayer isn't asking for anything. It's recognizing what already exists in spiritual reality. When you stop begging and start acknowledging the divine presence that's already complete and perfect, miracles begin to unfold naturally in your experience. This shift from petition to recognition transforms everything. Instead of praying, "Please heal me," you pray, "I recognize the perfect health that already exists in divine consciousness." This isn't positive thinking. It's spiritual realization that changes your entire vibrational frequency. Most people pray from a sense of lack, unconsciously affirming what they don't have. When you pray, "Please give me money," you're actually declaring your poverty to the universe. Joel taught that this kind of prayer reinforces the very condition you're trying to change. The correct way begins with understanding that God is infinite supply, perfect health, and complete love right now. These aren't things God has. They are what God is. When you recognize this truth, you align with the divine nature instead of focusing on human limitations and problems. This recognition prayer doesn't try to change God's mind or convince divine love to help you. Instead, it opens your consciousness to receive what has always been available. The shift happens in your awareness, not in some distant heaven where God might grant your request. Joel's method starts with complete silence, not the silence of an empty mind, but the silence of recognition. You become still and acknowledge, divine love is present right here, right now. You're not trying to create this presence. You're simply recognizing what's already true. In this silence, you don't make requests or create shopping lists for God. Instead, you rest in the awareness that infinite intelligence is already operating perfectly in your life. This isn't passive waiting. It's active recognition of spiritual reality that exists beyond material appearances. The power comes from your willingness to stop trying to direct God and instead let divine wisdom direct you. When you recognize that perfect harmony already exists in consciousness, your outer experience begins to reflect this inner spiritual reality. Here's what happens when you pray the Goldsmith way. Instead of asking God to heal your relationship, you recognize divine love as the only real presence between you and others. You stop trying to fix the person and start acknowledging the Christ in them. For financial challenges, you don't beg for money. You recognize infinite supply as your true nature and rest in that awareness. You're not trying to demonstrate supply. You're acknowledging the supply that already exists in divine consciousness and letting it appear in your experience. This prayer of recognition works because it aligns your consciousness with truth instead of illusion. When you stop affirming problems through petition prayers and start acknowledging spiritual reality, your entire world begins to transform from the inside out. Sarah had been praying desperately for her sick mother for months using traditional prayer. "Please God, heal my mother. Please don't let her suffer." But her mother's condition only worsened. Sarah felt like God wasn't listening, and her faith began to crumble under the weight of fear. Then Sarah discovered Joel's teaching about recognition prayer. Instead of begging, she began to sit quietly and recognize, divine life is the only life of my mother right now. She stopped trying to heal her mother and started acknowledging the perfect spiritual being her mother truly was. Within 3 weeks, Sarah's mother began showing remarkable improvement. The doctors were amazed by her body's sudden ability to heal. But Sarah understood. She hadn't changed God's mind about healing. She had aligned her consciousness with the truth that divine perfection was already present. Mark was facing bankruptcy after his business failed. His traditional prayers sounded like this: "God, please save my business. I need money urgently. Please help me pay these bills." But the more he prayed this way, the worse his financial situation became. When Mark learned Joel's method, everything shifted. Instead of focusing on lack, he began recognizing, divine supply is my true nature. Infinite abundance is expressing through me right now. He stopped seeing himself as a struggling businessman and started acknowledging his spiritual identity. New opportunities began appearing within days. A former client offered him a consulting contract. An investor approached him about a new venture. Mark realized he wasn't creating these opportunities through desperate prayer. He was allowing them to appear by recognizing the abundance that was always there. Jennifer's marriage was falling apart. Her prayers were filled with demands. God, make my husband love me again, change his heart, fix our relationship. But the more she prayed this way, the further apart they grew. She was unknowingly affirming the very problems she wanted to solve. Joel's approach transformed everything for Jennifer. She stopped trying to change her husband and began recognizing divine love as the only real presence in their relationship. She would sit in silence and acknowledge, "The Christ in my husband is perfect and complete right now." The shift was profound. As Jennifer stopped seeing her husband through the lens of problems and started recognizing his spiritual perfection, their relationship began healing. Her husband felt the difference in her energy and began responding with more love and understanding than he had shown in years. These aren't coincidences or lucky breaks. Joel discovered that when you align your consciousness with spiritual truth instead of human problems, divine law begins operating in your experience. You're not manipulating God, you're cooperating with the way spiritual principles actually work in the universe. The recognition method works because it acknowledges reality as it exists in divine consciousness. Problems exist only in human belief, but perfection exists in spiritual truth. When you stop giving power to the illusion and start recognizing what's real, your experience transforms naturally. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Joel taught 3 powerful techniques to enhance recognition prayer. First is the I am recognition. Instead of saying I am sick or I am broke, you recognize I am divine life and I am infinite supply. This aligns your identity with spiritual truth rather than material appearances. The second technique is present perfection awareness. You don't pray for future healing. You recognize present wholeness. Divine perfection is expressing right here, right now. This shifts you out of waiting mode and into receiving mode where miracles can actually manifest. The third method is spiritual seeing. When you look at challenging situations, you practice seeing beyond appearances to the spiritual reality. You're not denying problems exist. You're acknowledging that something greater than the problem is also present and more real. The Christ within technique transforms how you pray for others. Instead of seeing them as sick, troubled, or lacking, you practice recognizing the divine presence that constitutes their true being. This isn't pretending problems don't exist. It's acknowledging what's more real than the problems. When your child is struggling, instead of praying, "Fix my child," you recognize, "The Christ in my child is perfect and complete." When your friend faces difficulties, you acknowledge divine wisdom is guiding them right now. This prayer lifts them energetically because you're seeing their true spiritual identity. This method works because consciousness is connected. When you hold someone in the light of their spiritual perfection, instead of the darkness of their problems, you create a healing atmosphere around them. Your recognition becomes a blessing that supports their own awakening to truth. For deep healing, Joel taught the melting meditation. You begin by recognizing divine love as an infinite ocean. Then you let your personal sense of self, with all its problems, fears, and limitations, dissolve into this ocean like salt dissolving in water. In this dissolved state, there's no you with problems and no separate God to petition. There's only one infinite consciousness expressing perfectly. From this unified awareness, you recognize that perfect health, abundant supply, and harmonious relationships are simply the natural expression of divine being. You don't return from this meditation with new requests for God. You return with the recognition that you and the Father are one, and therefore divine perfection is your natural state. This realization transforms your outer experience because your inner consciousness has been fundamentally shifted. The invisible supply method addresses material needs through spiritual recognition. Instead of praying for specific amounts of money or particular things, you recognize that divine consciousness is infinite supply expressing in unlimited forms and ways. You practice seeing beyond the physical world to the spiritual realm where infinite resources exist. Your job isn't to tell God how to provide. It's to recognize that provision is already made in consciousness and trust divine intelligence to bring it forth in the perfect form. This prayer works because it aligns you with the source of all supply instead of specific human solutions. When you stop limiting divine provision to your human concepts and start recognizing infinite possibility, resources can appear in ways you never imagined possible. Many people struggle with recognition prayer because their minds resist acknowledging perfection when problems seem so real. Joel understood this challenge. He taught that you don't have to believe the spiritual truth feels real. You just have to be willing to recognize it as truth. Start small. If recognizing perfect health seems impossible when you're in pain, begin by recognizing divine love's presence with you in the pain. You're not denying the physical experience. You're acknowledging that something greater is also present in the situation. The key is persistence without strain. Keep gently returning your attention to spiritual reality whenever your mind gets caught in problem thinking. This isn't about forcing yourself to believe. It's about training your consciousness to rest in truth instead of illusion. When recognition prayer doesn't seem to work immediately, Joel taught this was often because people are still secretly petitioning while thinking they're recognizing. If you're recognizing divine health but hoping it will heal your body, you're still in petition mode. True recognition has no agenda for outcomes. You acknowledge spiritual perfection because it's true, not because you want it to change your circumstances. This pure recognition without personal desire is what opens consciousness to receive divine grace. Sometimes the healing comes as inner peace in the midst of challenge rather than changed circumstances. Sometimes physical healing follows. But always consciousness is transformed when you genuinely recognize spiritual reality as more real than material appearances. Another common obstacle is trying to use recognition prayer to control specific outcomes. If you're recognizing divine love in your marriage but secretly trying to make your spouse behave differently, you're mixing truth with manipulation, which blocks the flow of grace. Joel taught that genuine recognition means surrendering all personal will about how things should unfold. You recognize spiritual perfection and then trust divine intelligence to express that perfection in whatever way serves the highest good for everyone involved. This surrender isn't passive resignation. It's active trust in divine wisdom. When you stop trying to direct the universe and start recognizing its perfect operation, you align with power that's infinitely greater than your human efforts. The most challenging obstacle is doubt that seems to arise from nowhere. You'll be practicing recognition prayer successfully, then suddenly question whether any of this is real or whether you're just fooling yourself with spiritual platitudes. Joel experienced this too. He taught that doubt is actually a sign you're making progress. It shows you're shifting from reliance on human thinking to spiritual realization, and the ego mind naturally resists this transformation. When doubt arises, don't fight it or try to build faith. Simply return to recognition of what you know is spiritually true. Acknowledge divine presence regardless of how you feel about it. This gentle persistence through doubt is what builds genuine spiritual consciousness. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced practitioners learn to live in continuous recognition. This doesn't mean constant formal prayer, but maintaining awareness that divine presence is the underlying reality of every moment and every person you encounter throughout your day. When you wake up, instead of immediately thinking about problems, you recognize divine life awakening as you. When you meet challenging people, you silently acknowledge the Christ in them. When difficulties arise at work, you recognize divine intelligence operating perfectly even in apparent chaos. This continuous recognition creates a protective atmosphere around you. Problems still appear, but they don't have the same power to disturb your peace because you're anchored in spiritual awareness rather than material perception. In business and career, recognition prayer transforms how you approach professional challenges. Instead of praying for success, promotion, or more clients, you recognize divine intelligence as your true employer and infinite creativity as your real skill. When facing difficult decisions, you don't ask God what to choose. Instead, you recognize divine wisdom as your consciousness and trust that the right action will be revealed naturally. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you responsive to spiritual guidance rather than driven by human ambition. Your work becomes a form of service where divine love expresses through you. Success isn't something you chase. It becomes the natural result of consciousness aligned with spiritual purpose. People sense this authenticity and are drawn to work with you. For deep relationship healing, advanced practitioners recognize that every person in their life is actually divine consciousness appearing in human form. This doesn't mean ignoring harmful behavior, but it means seeing beyond behavior to the spiritual being that each person truly is. When someone treats you badly, instead of praying for them to change or for protection from them, you recognize the Christ in them as perfect and complete. This recognition often dissolves the negative dynamic because you're no longer energetically engaging with their ego-level behavior. This practice transforms not only your relationships but your entire life experience. When you consistently see spiritual perfection as the truth about everyone, you create a world where love and harmony can flourish, because that's what you're recognizing as real. The ultimate practice Joel taught was recognizing that there is no distance between you and divine consciousness. You don't pray to God up there. You recognize God as the very consciousness with which you're thinking right now. This isn't blasphemy or ego inflation. It's the recognition Jesus taught when he said, "I and my Father are one." When you truly understand this unity, prayer becomes communion rather than communication. You're not talking to God, you're resting in God as your own being. From this awareness, miracles aren't supernatural events but natural expressions of consciousness that knows its own divine nature. Healing, provision, and harmony flow naturally because they're the normal state of consciousness aligned with truth. When you master Joel's prayer method, you discover that you don't need to pray for specific situations anymore. Instead, you live in the constant recognition that divine perfection is already established in consciousness and is expressing perfectly in all directions. This doesn't mean becoming passive about life challenges. It means approaching them from spiritual realization rather than human concern. You take whatever human action feels right, but your security comes from recognizing spiritual reality rather than depending on human solutions. Life becomes an adventure of watching divine love express in countless beautiful ways instead of a struggle to get God to fix your problems. You realize you never had problems. You only had temporary unawareness of the perfection that was always present. The most profound transformation comes when you realize that you've been the very divine presence you were praying to all along. The consciousness reading these words right now is not separate from infinite consciousness. It is infinite consciousness individualized as you. This recognition doesn't make you special compared to others. It makes you realize that everyone is this same divine consciousness appearing in infinite variety. When you truly understand this, compassion flows naturally because you see yourself everywhere you look. Prayer becomes effortless because you're no longer trying to connect with something outside yourself. You're simply resting in awareness of what you've always been. This is the secret Joel discovered. You don't become divine. You recognize that you already are. Living from this recognition transforms everything, but not always in the ways you might expect. Sometimes outer circumstances change dramatically. Sometimes they stay the same, but your peace and joy in the midst of them becomes unshakable. The real miracle isn't getting what your human self wants. It's discovering that your true spiritual self is already complete and lacks nothing. From this completeness, you can enjoy human experiences without being dependent on them for your happiness. You become a blessing to everyone you meet because you're not trying to get anything from them. Instead, you're radiating the recognition of their divine nature. This recognition lifts others and creates healing wherever you go. Joel Goldsmith's warning was profound. Most people are praying wrong because they're affirming limitation instead of recognizing infinite possibility. They're petitioning God instead of acknowledging the divine nature that's already present and perfect. The right way to pray is the way of recognition, acknowledging spiritual reality as more real than material appearances. When you make this shift, you don't just change your prayer life. You transform your entire existence from struggle to grace. You now have the key to the kingdom of heaven that exists within consciousness. Use it wisely, practice it daily, Share it with others who are ready to receive it. This isn't just about better prayer, it's about awakening to who you really are. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path. You think spiritual growth requires decades of practice, endless meditation, and perfect discipline? Joel Goldsmith discovered something that shatters this belief completely. What he found was so powerful, so immediate, that it transformed lives in moments, not years. This secret remained hidden in his advanced teachings. The secret is this: you are not seeking God or healing or abundance. You are the very consciousness through which God expresses itself. The moment you stop trying to get something from the spiritual realm and recognize you are the spiritual realm expressing as you, everything changes instantly. Most spiritual seekers spend years begging, pleading, and working to achieve what they already are. Goldsmith realized that consciousness doesn't need to be attained, improved, or healed. It needs to be recognized. You don't become spiritual. You recognize you never stopped being pure spirit having a temporary human experience. This recognition isn't intellectual understanding. It's a felt knowing that dissolves the illusion of separation between you and your source. When this hits you, problems don't get solved. They simply cease to exist in your awareness because you realize they were never real in the first place. Goldsmith called this recognition dying daily to the personal sense of self. Not literal death, but the death of believing you are a limited human seeking help from a distant God. This death is actually the most liberating experience possible. It's returning home to who you've always been. When you truly grasp that there is no separation between consciousness and its expression as you, seeking stops. Struggle stops. The need for healing stops because you realize there was never anything wrong with the real you. What seemed broken was just a mistaken identity. This isn't positive thinking or affirmations. This is the recognition of what already is. You don't create abundance, health, or peace. You recognize these as your natural state when the false belief in limitation dissolves. They were never absent, only hidden by the lie of separation. The transformation happens the instant this recognition becomes real for you. Not tomorrow, not after more spiritual work, but now. In this moment, you can let go of the seeking self and know yourself as consciousness itself, whole and perfect, and expressing as your life. Here's what happens when this recognition becomes real instead of just an idea. Sarah, a student of Goldsmith's teachings, had been struggling with chronic pain for 12 years. Doctors offered no solutions. She had tried every spiritual practice, every healer, every technique. Then one morning during meditation, it hit her. She wasn't Sarah seeking healing. She was consciousness experiencing itself as Sarah. The pain belonged to the false identity, not to consciousness. In that moment of recognition, the pain simply wasn't there anymore. Not healed, just absent. She didn't fight the pain, pray it away, or visualize health. She recognized that consciousness, her true identity, cannot experience pain or limitation. The body that seemed separate from consciousness was revealed as consciousness expressing itself in form. Perfect form. This wasn't a medical miracle requiring explanation. This was consciousness recognizing itself and dissolving the false belief that it could be limited, damaged, or separated from its own perfection. When the lie disappears, only truth remains. The key is understanding that consciousness isn't something you have, like a tool or a possession. Consciousness is what you are. You don't use consciousness to solve problems. You recognize that problems exist only in the false belief that you are something other than consciousness itself. When Goldsmith said, "I can of my own self do nothing," he wasn't expressing weakness. He was revealing the secret. The personal self that struggles and seeks and suffers doesn't exist. Only consciousness exists, appearing as infinite expressions, including the one called you. This recognition dissolves the root of all problems, the belief in separation. Not separation between people, but the fundamental separation between consciousness and its expression. When this false belief dies, what remains is perfect being expressing itself perfectly as your life. Stop trying to improve your life. Start recognizing that life itself is consciousness appearing as you. This recognition is available right now in this moment, regardless of your circumstances or history or spiritual background. You already are what you've been seeking. Michael had lost everything in a business collapse. His marriage ended, his house was foreclosed, and depression consumed him. He discovered Goldsmith's teachings during his darkest period, and something clicked immediately. Instead of seeing himself as a failed businessman, he began recognizing himself as consciousness itself. This wasn't denial of his circumstances. This was recognition that consciousness, his true nature, cannot fail, be divorced, or lose anything. The circumstances belonged to a false identity that never actually existed. What he really was remained untouched by any external condition. Within 3 months, opportunities began appearing effortlessly. Not through hard work or positive thinking, but through the natural expression of consciousness recognizing itself. A new business emerged, relationships healed, and abundance flowed not because he made it happen, but because he stopped believing it could be absent. The transformation came from within, not from changing external conditions, but from recognizing that his true self was never touched by any condition. When the false identity died, consciousness expressed itself naturally as success, love, and abundance. Linda struggled with anxiety that controlled her life for 20 years. She couldn't leave her house without panic attacks. Traditional therapy helped, but never eliminated the root fear. When she discovered this Goldsmith principle, everything shifted in ways she never imagined possible. She stopped trying to heal Linda's anxiety and started recognizing that consciousness, her true nature, cannot be anxious. Anxiety belonged to the false identity that believed it was separate from its source. Consciousness is naturally peaceful, complete, and fearless because it knows no separation. The first time she left her house after this recognition, something was different, not because the anxiety was healed, but because there was no one there to be anxious. Consciousness experiencing itself as Linda cannot be threatened because it knows its own eternal, invincible nature. This wasn't gradual improvement. This was instant transformation through recognition of what was already true. The anxiety didn't go away. It was revealed as never having belonged to her real identity in the first place. Robert's relationship with his father had been broken for 15 years. Resentment, anger, and hurt defined every interaction. He tried forgiveness techniques, therapy, and spiritual counseling. Nothing created lasting peace until he encountered this deeper truth about identity. Instead of Robert trying to forgive his father, consciousness recognized itself expressing as both Robert and his father. How can consciousness be angry at itself? How can pure awareness be in conflict with its own expression? The relationship problems belong to false identities, not to their true nature. When Robert next saw his father, something had fundamentally shifted. Not because his father changed, but because Robert was no longer there as a separate self that could be hurt or offended. Only consciousness was present, expressing itself as love, understanding, and peace. The healing was immediate and complete, not because they worked through their issues, but because the separate selves that had issues were recognized as illusions. What remained was consciousness loving itself through both expressions. These aren't isolated cases or special people with unusual spiritual gifts. This is the natural result of recognizing what you actually are instead of who you think you are. Every problem, every limitation, every struggle belongs to a false identity that consciousness has never actually assumed. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the main recognition, Goldsmith taught specific practices to deepen this understanding. The first is what he called the pause. Throughout your day, pause and ask, who is having this experience? Not what should I do about this situation, but who is actually here having this experience? When you look for the one having the experience, you'll discover something remarkable. There's no separate person there. There's only consciousness being aware of whatever is appearing. The pause breaks the hypnosis of believing you are the character in the story instead of the awareness in which the story appears. Practice this pause, especially during challenging moments. When fear arises, pause and look for the one who is afraid. When anger appears, pause and search for the angry person. When lack seems real, pause and find the one who lacks something. You won't find anyone there. What you'll find is consciousness itself, naturally peaceful, complete, and whole, watching these experiences come and go like clouds in an empty sky. The clouds don't disturb the sky, and experiences don't disturb consciousness. The second practice Goldsmith emphasized was impersonal meditation. Instead of meditating to get something or fix yourself, sit in recognition that you are consciousness itself, having no problems to solve, nothing to attain, nowhere to go. Don't try to stop thoughts or achieve special states. Simply rest as consciousness, knowing that whatever appears in your awareness is consciousness expressing itself. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, sounds, all consciousness appearing to itself as temporary experiences. This isn't concentration or visualization. This is relaxation into what you actually are. Like space relaxing as space, not trying to become space. You don't become consciousness through meditation. You recognize you never stopped being consciousness, having various experiences. Regular practice of this recognition meditation dissolves the habit of identifying as the temporary experiences and strengthens the knowing of yourself as the permanent consciousness in which all experiences appear and disappear. The third complementary practice is living from the recognition. Instead of applying this truth only during meditation or spiritual study, bring this recognition into daily activities. As you work, recognize that consciousness is working through you. As you speak, know that consciousness is communicating itself. When problems appear, instead of immediately trying to solve them from the level of personal effort, pause and recognize, consciousness is having this experience. What wants to be expressed here? Often, solutions appear effortlessly because consciousness naturally expresses itself as wisdom and right action. This isn't bypassing practical responsibility. This is fulfilling responsibility from your true nature, instead of from fear, lack, or separation. Actions taken from consciousness carry a different quality. They're more effective, less stressful, and aligned with what serves everyone. Living from this recognition transforms ordinary activities into expressions of consciousness recognizing itself. Work becomes service, relationships become love in action, and challenges become opportunities for consciousness to demonstrate its infinite creativity. The fourth supportive practice Goldsmith taught was dissolving the sense of otherness. Every time you see someone as separate from consciousness, you reinforce the illusion of your own separation. Every time you judge, resist, or fear another, you strengthen the false identity. Instead, practice seeing everyone as consciousness expressing itself uniquely, not good consciousness or bad consciousness, just consciousness appearing as infinite variety. The person who seems difficult, the situation that feels threatening, the circumstance that appears limiting, all consciousness appearing to itself. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or avoiding necessary boundaries. It means recognizing that consciousness itself is living as all expressions while maintaining its essential nature as love, wisdom, and wholeness. When otherness dissolves, your own sense of separation dissolves with it. You can't see unity everywhere else while maintaining separation for yourself. As the world becomes consciousness expressing itself, you naturally recognize yourself as that same consciousness expressing uniquely as you. The most common obstacle people encounter is thinking this recognition should eliminate all human experiences. They expect that recognizing consciousness means never feeling sad, never facing challenges, never dealing with practical concerns. This misunderstanding creates frustration and doubt. Consciousness expresses itself through infinite experiences, including human emotions and circumstances. The recognition doesn't eliminate the human experience. It eliminates the suffering that comes from believing you are the human experience instead of consciousness having the human experience. You can feel sadness without being a sad person. You can face challenges without being a struggling person. You can deal with practical concerns without being a limited person. The experiences flow through consciousness without disturbing its essential peace and completeness. The goal isn't to become a robot without feelings. The goal is to recognize feelings as temporary experiences moving through consciousness, like weather moving through sky. The sky remains unchanged regardless of what weather passes through it. Another common obstacle is expecting others to understand or validate this recognition. Family, friends, and colleagues may not resonate with this perspective. Some may actively resist or criticize it. This can create doubt about the validity of your own recognition. Remember that consciousness doesn't require external validation. Your recognition of what you are stands independent of anyone else's opinion or understanding. You don't need permission to know yourself as consciousness, and you don't need agreement to live from this recognition. Continue expressing love, kindness, and wisdom regardless of others' responses. Sometimes the most powerful teaching is simply being the peace that you recognize yourself to be. Let your life demonstrate the fruits of this recognition, rather than trying to convince anyone through words. Trust your own experience. If this recognition brings peace, clarity, and natural wisdom into your life, that's all the validation you need. Truth doesn't become more true when others agree with it, and it doesn't become less true when others reject it. A third major obstacle is the tendency to make this recognition into another spiritual practice to perfect. The mind wants to turn this into something you do rather than something you recognize. It wants to measure progress, track improvements, and create goals around consciousness. But consciousness isn't something you practice or improve. It's what you are. You can't become better at being consciousness, only clearer in recognizing consciousness as your identity. There's nothing to perfect because consciousness is already perfect, complete, and whole. When you catch yourself trying to work on this recognition or improve your understanding of it, simply return to the basic knowing. I am consciousness itself having this experience. Not I will become consciousness, or I need to understand consciousness better, but I am consciousness now. This eliminates the spiritual ego that wants to achieve enlightenment or become more conscious. You can't become what you already are. You can only recognize what you've never stopped being. The final common obstacle is fear that this recognition is somehow selfish, arrogant, or disconnected from reality. Some worry that knowing themselves as consciousness means ignoring other people's suffering or avoiding practical responsibilities in the world. Actually, the opposite occurs. When you recognize yourself as consciousness, you simultaneously recognize everyone else as the same consciousness expressing uniquely. This naturally generates compassion, understanding, and appropriate action to serve wherever needed. You become more engaged with life, not less. But your engagement comes from love and wisdom rather than fear and obligation. You respond to situations from consciousness recognizing itself everywhere, rather than from a separate self trying to fix or control outcomes. This recognition doesn't make you special or superior. It reveals what everyone actually is, whether they recognize it or not. You're not different from others. You're simply awake to what you all share as your common essence and true identity. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced integration begins when this recognition becomes your default way of experiencing life, rather than something you remember occasionally. David, a corporate executive, found himself naturally operating from consciousness during high-pressure meetings and difficult negotiations. Instead of stress and competitive thinking, he found himself accessing solutions that served everyone involved, not through strategy or manipulation, but through consciousness expressing itself as wisdom and creative problem-solving. His career transformed as colleagues began seeking his perspective on complex issues. He didn't change his job or abandon his responsibilities. He fulfilled them from a completely different source. Consciousness working through David generated better results with less effort because it naturally aligns with what serves the highest good for all involved. This integration happened gradually over months. Not because the recognition took time to develop, but because old habits of thinking and reacting needed time to dissolve. As they dissolved, consciousness expressed itself more freely through his daily activities. Maria, a mother of 3 young children, discovered that parenting from consciousness created profound shifts in her family dynamics. Instead of reactive parenting based on fear, control, or exhaustion, she found herself responding to each situation from wisdom and unconditional love. Her children began exhibiting more peaceful behavior, not because she controlled them differently, but because consciousness expressing through her naturally created an atmosphere of safety and understanding. Problems that used to create family conflict simply resolved themselves. This wasn't perfect parenting or the absence of normal family challenges. This was meeting every situation from consciousness rather than from a stressed, overwhelmed mother identity. The situations remained, the quality of response transformed completely. She realized that the best gift she could give her children wasn't perfect circumstances, but the demonstration of living from peace, wisdom, and love. They absorbed this way of being naturally, learning to access their own inner peace during difficult moments. James, facing serious financial difficulties, applied this recognition in the most practical way possible. Instead of panicking about money or working frantically to solve the crisis, he rested in knowing himself as consciousness, which lacks nothing and needs nothing. This wasn't denial of practical concerns or avoiding necessary action. This was taking action from consciousness rather than from fear and desperation. Opportunities, resources, and solutions appeared in ways he never could have planned or forced. A former colleague offered unexpected consulting work. An old debt was repaid without him even requesting it. New income streams emerged from talents he'd forgotten he possessed, not through manifestation techniques, but through consciousness expressing itself naturally as abundance. The financial situation improved steadily over several months, but more importantly, his relationship with security and abundance transformed permanently. He learned to live from the natural abundance of consciousness rather than from fear of lack. Rachel, dealing with a serious health diagnosis, discovered that relating to her condition from consciousness rather than from fear created space for natural healing to occur. She didn't deny medical reality or avoid treatment. She received treatment from consciousness rather than from a frightened patient identity. Her entire healthcare experience transformed. Doctors remarked on her unusual peace and clarity during a difficult treatment process. Her body responded better to treatment than expected. Her recovery exceeded medical predictions, though she focused on consciousness expressing itself as healing rather than on outcomes. She realized that consciousness, her true nature, cannot be genuinely threatened by any condition. Bodies change, circumstances shift, but consciousness remains eternally healthy, whole, and complete. This knowing permeated her cells and supported her healing process. Whether physical healing occurred or not, she had found something more valuable, the recognition that her essential self was completely untouched by any physical condition. This peace became more precious than any external healing. The ultimate stage of this recognition is when it becomes so natural that you forget you ever believed you were something other than consciousness. Like forgetting you ever believed the earth was flat once you clearly see its roundness from space. At this stage, problems still appear, but they're like movies on a screen. The movie may show drama, conflict, or challenge, but the screen remains unaffected. You respond appropriately to whatever appears without identifying as the characters in the story. This isn't detachment or spiritual bypassing. This is full engagement from your true nature rather than from false identity. Actions become more effective, relationships become more authentic, and life becomes more aligned with wisdom and love. You realize this recognition was never about becoming something new. It was about remembering something ancient, eternal, and ever-present. The consciousness that you have always been and can never stop being. Living from this recognition doesn't make you perfect or eliminate all human experiences. You still face practical challenges, experience emotions, and navigate relationships. But all of this happens within consciousness rather than as consciousness trying to solve problems. The difference is profound. Instead of a separate self struggling with life, there's consciousness experiencing itself as infinite expressions. Some expressions appear pleasant, others challenging, but all are recognized as temporary experiences within eternal awareness. This recognition brings natural humility, because you realize everyone is consciousness appearing uniquely. It brings natural compassion because you see everyone facing the same fundamental misidentification. It brings natural wisdom, because consciousness expresses itself as understanding. You become a beneficial presence wherever you go, not through effort or spiritual techniques, but through the natural radiation of consciousness recognizing itself. Peace, love and wisdom expressed through you because that's what you actually are. The most advanced practitioners of this recognition discover they can no longer find the boundary between their individual consciousness and universal consciousness. Not through merger or achievement, but through recognizing there never was a boundary to begin with. This isn't loss of individuality. This is recognition that individuality is how consciousness expresses its infinite creativity. You remain unique while knowing your essence as the same consciousness appearing as everyone and everything. At this stage, service becomes natural because serving others is consciousness serving itself through apparent separation. Love becomes effortless because loving others is consciousness loving itself in all its expressions. You realize this journey was never about personal enlightenment. It was about consciousness recognizing itself everywhere, dissolving the illusion of separation that creates all suffering. Your recognition contributes to the awakening of consciousness in all its expressions. This secret that Joel Goldsmith protected and revealed to advanced students is now yours. Not as information to understand, but as recognition to live from. You are consciousness itself appearing as your unique expression. Never separate from your source, eternally whole and complete. Every problem you've ever faced existed only in the belief that you were something other than consciousness. Every limitation you've experienced belonged to a false identity that consciousness never actually assumed. The real you has always been free, peaceful, and abundant. This recognition is available right now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances or spiritual background. Stop seeking what you already are. Start living from the consciousness that you have never stopped being. Let this be the moment your seeking ends and your authentic life begins. Your transformation isn't a future goal. It's a present recognition. You are consciousness itself, expressing uniquely as you, eternally connected to the infinite source of all life. This has always been true. Now you know it. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.
The misunderstood command. Picture this. You're overwhelmed. The bills are piling up, your relationship is fracturing, your health is declining, and you can't sleep at night because your mind won't stop racing. You reach for your Bible, desperately searching for comfort, and someone tells you, just be still and know that He is God. You need to find a quiet place, light a candle, and meditate. So you try. You sit in silence. You attempt to quiet your anxious thoughts. But the chaos doesn't stop. The problems don't disappear. And worse, you feel like you're failing at faith because you can't achieve some mystical state of inner peace. If this sounds familiar, I have news that will revolutionize your understanding of one of Scripture's most quoted verses. What if I told you that "be still and know that I am God" has almost nothing to do with sitting quietly in a peaceful room? What if this verse, ripped from its context and stripped of its original meaning, has been used to prescribe exactly the opposite of what God intended? For decades, this passage from Psalm 46:10 has been plastered on coffee mugs, wall art and devotional books, always accompanied by images of serene lakes, mountain sunsets, or peaceful meditation poses. It has become the go-to verse for promoting contemplative prayer, spiritual retreats, and mindfulness practices. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with quiet reflection, this interpretation has buried one of the Bible's most powerful declarations about God's intervention in the midst of catastrophe. The verse you've been taught to whisper in a candlelit room was actually shouted over the sounds of warfare, earthquakes, and national collapse. It wasn't advice for your morning quiet time, it was a battle cry, a command to stop fighting and let God fight for you. And once you understand what this verse actually means, it will transform not just how you read your Bible, but how you face every overwhelming circumstance in your life. The context. You never heard to understand what "be still and know that I am God" really means. We need to read Psalm 46 in its entirety, not as an isolated verse designed for inspirational posters. The psalm begins with these words, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. This is not peaceful language. This is apocalyptic imagery, earthquakes that shake mountains into the sea, waters roaring and foaming in chaos, the very foundations of creation being undone. The psalmist is describing total catastrophe, the kind of disaster that makes your personal problems seem small by comparison. But the psalm doesn't stop with natural disasters. Verse 6 continues, "The nations rage, the kingdoms totter, he utters his voice, the earth melts." Now we've moved from natural catastrophe to military threat. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms are collapsing. This is the sound of warfare, of armies clashing, of empires threatening to destroy God's people. The historical context of Israel makes this even more vivid. Imagine being a small nation surrounded by massive military powers, Egypt to the south, Assyria to the north, Babylon to the east. Any of these empires could decide on any given day to march their armies through your land, destroy your cities, kill your men, and enslave your children. Archaeological evidence shows us what ancient warfare looked like in this period. It wasn't clean or distant. Siege engines battered city walls, fire consumed homes, starvation weakened populations until they surrendered or died. The Assyrians in particular were known for their brutal treatment of conquered peoples, including impalement, flaying, and mass deportations. When the psalmist talks about nations raging and kingdoms tottering, he's talking about existential threats to Israel's survival. This is the context, the absolute chaos and terror in which God speaks the words, "Be still and know that I am God." But even more revealing is what comes immediately after this command in verse 10, "I will be exalted among the nations, I will be exalted in the earth." God isn't calling for a meditation session. He's declaring his intention to act, to intervene, to demonstrate his power on a global scale. The stillness he commands isn't the stillness of peaceful contemplation. It's the stillness of a people who stop their frantic efforts to save themselves and stand back to watch God work. Throughout the psalm, there's a refrain that appears twice. "The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." The title Lord of Hosts, or Yahweh Sabaoth in Hebrew, literally means Lord of Armies. This is God's military title. It's the name used when he goes to war on behalf of his people. The psalmist isn't invoking God the peaceful meditation guide. He's invoking God the warrior, the commander of heavenly armies, the one who fights battles that humans cannot win. When you read Psalm 46 as a complete unit, a coherent message emerges. When the world is falling apart, when enemies surround you, when circumstances are beyond your control, God commands you to stop trying to fix it yourself and let him demonstrate his power. The stillness isn't an escape from the chaos, it's a posture of trust in the middle of it. The Hebrew that changes everything. Now we arrive at the linguistic evidence that completely transforms our understanding of this verse. The Hebrew phrase translated as "be still" is rapha, and it appears throughout the Old Testament with a consistent meaning that has little to do with quiet meditation. The word rapha fundamentally means to let drop, to let go, to release, or to abandon. It carries the sense of stopping an action, ceasing an effort, or relinquishing control. In various contexts throughout Hebrew scripture, this word is used to describe letting your hands drop in exhaustion or surrender. Exodus 4:26, where it's used negatively, "Do not let your hands be weak." Withdrawing from battle, Judges 8:3, where Gideon tells the men of Ephraim that God gave them victory so their anger toward him should rapha or subside. Ceasing from work, 2 Chronicles 15:7, where the people are told not to let your hands be weak, or literally do not rapha your hands. Abandoning a course of action, Jeremiah 4:9-24, where Damascus becomes feeble and turns to flee, her hands rapha or drop in helplessness. In military contexts, which are particularly relevant to Psalm 46, rapha often appears as a command to stop fighting, to lower your weapons, to cease your military operations. It's the ancient equivalent of stand down. Cease fire, let go of your battle strategy. This is profoundly different from be still in the contemplative sense. The English phrase be still suggests becoming quiet, calming your mind, entering a meditative state. But Rapha is active vocabulary. It's a command to stop doing something you're currently doing, to release your grip on something you're currently holding, to abandon a strategy you're currently pursuing. Consider how different Bible translations have struggled with this word. The King James Version, be still the New International Version, be still the English Standard Version, be still the New Living Translation, be still, but some more recent translations have attempted to capture the fuller meaning. The New American Standard Bible includes a footnote, or let go. Relax, the Complete Jewish Bible translates it, desist, and know that I am God. The Holman Christian Standard Bible offers, stop your fighting. This last translation is perhaps closest to the original intent. God is saying, stop your fighting, cease your striving, let go of your strategies, drop your weapons, surrender your attempts at control. I've got this. The phrase, and know that I am God, takes on new significance when paired with the correct understanding of Rapha. The Hebrew word yada, translated as know, doesn't mean intellectual acknowledgement. It means intimate, experiential knowledge. It's the same word used to describe the intimate knowledge between husband and wife. God is essentially saying, stop fighting so you can experience who I am. Let go so you can truly know my power. This makes theological sense within the broader narrative of Scripture. Throughout the Bible, God repeatedly tells his people to stop relying on their own strength and witness his intervention. At the Red Sea, Moses tells the people, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Exodus 14:14. That word, be silent, in Hebrew, it's related to our concept of ceasing activity, of stopping your panic, of letting God act. In 2 Chronicles 20, when Jehoshaphat faces a vast army, God says through the prophet, you will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. Verse 17, stand, hold, watch, don't fight, let me fight. In Isaiah 3:15, God laments, in returning and rest you shall be saved, in quietness and in trust shall be your strength. But you were unwilling. The pattern is consistent. God calls his people to stop their frantic self-reliance and trust his power to intervene. The misunderstood command, picture this, you're overwhelmed. The bills are piling up, your relationship is fracturing, your health is declining, and you can't sleep at night because your mind won't stop racing. You reach for your Bible, desperately searching for comfort, and someone tells you, just be still and know that he is God. You need to find a quiet place, light a candle and meditate. So you try. You sit in silence. You attempt to quiet your anxious thoughts, but the chaos doesn't stop. The problems don't disappear. And worse, you feel like you're failing at faith because you can't achieve some mystical state of inner peace. If this sounds familiar, I have news that will revolutionize your understanding of one of Scripture's most quoted verses. What if I told you that be still and know that I am God has almost nothing to do with sitting quietly in a peaceful room? What if this verse, ripped from its context and stripped of its original meaning, has been used to prescribe exactly the opposite of what God intended? For decades, this passage from Psalm 4:6-10 has been plastered on coffee mugs, wall art, and devotional books, always accompanied by images of serene lakes, mountain sunsets, or peaceful meditation poses. It has become the go-to verse for promoting contemplative prayer, spiritual retreats, and mindfulness practices. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with quiet reflection, this interpretation has buried one of the Bible's most powerful declarations about God's intervention in the midst of catastrophe. The verse you've been taught to whisper in a candlelit room was actually shouted over the sounds of warfare, earthquakes, and national collapse. It wasn't advice for your morning quiet time, it was a battle cry, a command to stop fighting and let God fight for you. And once you understand what this verse actually means, it will transform not just how you read your Bible, but how you face every overwhelming circumstance in your life. the context you never heard, to understand what "be still and know that I am God" really means, we need to read Psalm 46 in its entirety, not as an isolated verse designed for inspirational posters. The psalm begins with these words: "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling." This is not peaceful language. This is apocalyptic imagery. Earthquakes that shake mountains into the sea, waters roaring and foaming in chaos, the very foundations of creation being undone. The psalmist is describing total catastrophe, the kind of disaster that makes your personal problems seem small by comparison. But the psalm doesn't stop with natural disasters. Verse 6 continues, "The nations rage, the kingdoms totter, he utters his voice, the earth melts." Now we've moved from natural catastrophe to military threat. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms are collapsing. This is the sound of warfare, of armies clashing, of empires threatening to destroy God's people. The historical context of Israel makes this even more vivid. Imagine being a small nation surrounded by massive military powers: Egypt to the south, Assyria to the north, Babylon to the east. Any of these empires could decide on any given day to march their armies through your land, destroy your cities, kill your men, and enslave your children. Archaeological evidence shows us what ancient warfare looked like in this period. It wasn't clean or distant. Siege engines battered city walls, fire consumed homes, starvation weakened populations until they surrendered or died. The Assyrians, in particular, were known for their brutal treatment of conquered peoples, including impalement, flaying, and mass deportations. When the psalmist talks about nations raging and kingdoms tottering, he's talking about existential threats to Israel's survival. This is the context, the absolute chaos and terror in which God speaks the words, "Be still and know that I am God." But even more revealing is what comes immediately after this command in verse 10, "I will be exalted among the nations, I will be exalted in the earth." God isn't calling for a meditation session. He's declaring his intention to act, to intervene, to demonstrate his power on a global scale. The stillness he commands isn't the stillness of peaceful contemplation. It's the stillness of a people who stop their frantic efforts to save themselves and stand back, to watch God work. Throughout the psalm, there's a refrain that appears twice. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. The title, Lord of hosts, or Yahweh Sabaoth in Hebrew, literally means Lord of armies. This is God's military title. It's the name used when he goes to war on behalf of his people. The psalmist isn't invoking God the peaceful meditation guide. He's invoking God the warrior, the commander of heavenly armies, the one who fights battles that humans cannot win. When you read Psalm 46 as a complete unit, a coherent message emerges. When the world is falling apart, when enemies surround you, when circumstances are beyond your control, God commands you to stop trying to fix it yourself and let him demonstrate his power. The stillness isn't an escape from the chaos. It's a posture of trust in the middle of it. The Hebrew that changes everything. Now we arrive at the linguistic evidence that completely transforms our understanding of this verse. The Hebrew phrase, translated as "be still," is rapha, and it appears throughout the Old Testament with a consistent meaning that has little to do with quiet meditation. The word rapha fundamentally means to let drop, to let go, to release, or to abandon. It carries the sense of stopping an action, ceasing an effort, or relinquishing control. In various contexts throughout Hebrew scripture, this word is used to describe letting your hands drop in exhaustion or surrender. Exodus 4:26, where it's used negatively, "Do not let your hands be weak." Withdrawing from battle, Judges 8:3, where Gideon tells the men of Ephraim that God gave them victory, so their anger toward him should rapha or subside. Ceasing from work, 2 Chronicles 15:7, where the people are told not to let your hands be weak, or literally do not rapha your hands. abandoning a course of action, Jeremiah 4:9-24, where Damascus becomes feeble and turns to flee, her hands rougher or drop in helplessness. In military contexts, which are particularly relevant to Psalm 46, Rapha often appears as a command to stop fighting, to lower your weapons, to cease your military operations. It's the ancient equivalent of stand down, cease fire, let go of your battle strategy. This is profoundly different from be still in the contemplative sense. The English phrase be still suggests becoming quiet, calming your mind, entering a meditative state. But Rapha is active vocabulary. It's a command to stop doing something you're currently doing, to release your grip on something you're currently holding, to abandon a strategy you're currently pursuing. Consider how different Bible translations have struggled with this word. The King James Version, be still the New International Version, be still the English Standard Version, be still the New Living Translation, be still, but some more recent translations have attempted to capture the fuller meaning. The New American Standard Bible includes a footnote, or let go, relax. The Complete Jewish Bible translates it, desist, and know that I am God. The Holman Christian Standard Bible offers, stop your fighting. This last translation is perhaps closest to the original intent. God is saying, stop your fighting, cease your striving, let go of your strategies, drop your weapons, surrender your attempts at control. I've got this. The phrase, and know that I am God, takes on new significance when paired with the correct understanding of Rapha. The Hebrew word yada, translated as know, doesn't mean intellectual acknowledgement. It means intimate, experiential knowledge. It's the same word used to describe the intimate knowledge between husband and wife. God is essentially saying, stop fighting so you can experience who I am. Let go so you can truly know my power. This makes theological sense within the broader narrative of Scripture. Throughout the Bible, God repeatedly tells his people to stop relying on their own strength and witness his intervention. At the Red Sea, Moses tells the people, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Exodus 14:14. That word be silent in Hebrew? It's related to our concept of ceasing activity, of stopping your panic, of letting God act. In 2 Chronicles 20, when Jehoshaphat faces a vast army, God says through the prophet, you will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. Verse 17, stand, hold, watch. Don't fight, let me fight. In Isaiah 3:15, God laments, in returning and rest you shall be saved, in quietness and in trust shall be your strength. But you were unwilling. The pattern is consistent. God calls his people to stop their frantic self-reliance and trust his power to intervene. We've journeyed far from the popular interpretation of be still and know that I am God. What began as a verse about quiet meditation has been revealed as a battle cry, a command to cease our futile fighting and witness divine intervention. The mountains are still shaking. The nations are still raging. Your personal chaos may still feel overwhelming. But in the middle of the catastrophe, God's voice thunders with a command that is both terrifying and liberating. Stop fighting. Let go. Surrender control. I am God, and I will demonstrate my power. This is the interpretation you were never given, not because it's hidden in obscure theological texts, but because it demands something uncomfortable. It's easier to promote stillness as a stress management technique than to call people to the radical surrender of control. It's simpler to sell peaceful meditation than to challenge the self-reliance that defines modern life. But the real message of Psalm 4:6-10 is far more powerful than what fits on a coffee mug. It's an invitation to experience God's intervention in ways that only make sense if he is who he claims to be. So here's your challenge. Identify one area of your life where you're exhausting yourself with frantic control. One situation where your best efforts have proven inadequate. One circumstance where you're fighting a battle you cannot win. Now practice Rafa. Stop fighting. Release control. Make the conscious, costly choice to trust God with the outcome, not because you're certain of what He'll do, but because you're certain of who He is. Then watch. Position yourself to witness what God does when you're no longer in the way. Pay attention to how He acts when human solutions are clearly insufficient. Notice what happens when you finally stop fighting and let Him fight for you. This is what it means to truly know that He is God, not intellectual acknowledgement, but experiential reality. You know He is God when you've released control and watched Him demonstrate power you could never generate yourself. The invitation stands. The command echoes across the centuries, through catastrophe and chaos, speaking to your overwhelmed heart right now, Rafa. Let go. Stop fighting. I am God. Watch what I will do. The question is, will you? Will you release the white-knuckle grip on outcomes you cannot control? Will you stop the exhausting striving that masquerades as responsibility? Will you surrender the illusion of control and embrace the reality of His power? Be still. No, let that go. Drop your weapons. Cease your striving. Surrender your strategies and know, truly, intimately, experientially know that He is God. That's the interpretation you were never given, and it changes everything.
What if I told you that every problem you're desperately trying to solve is actually being sustained by your very attempts to fix it? Joel Goldsmith discovered something that revolutionizes everything we think we know about healing and transformation in this lifetime. The spiritual master who healed thousands without medicine, therapy, or manipulation revealed this profound secret. The moment you stop trying to change your circumstances, they begin to change by themselves. This isn't positive thinking or wishful hoping that somehow magically transforms reality. This is the law of non-resistance that operates beyond human effort and understanding. When you cease the mental struggle against what is, you align with a power that dissolves problems at their invisible source, not their visible effects that we see with our physical eyes. Your breakthrough begins the instant you stop fighting what you cannot control and start trusting what you cannot see but can absolutely experience through complete spiritual surrender to divine intelligence working through your life circumstances. Most people exhaust themselves pushing against their challenges like someone trying to move a mountain with their bare hands, sweating and straining without making any real progress. Joel Goldsmith taught that this effort actually feeds the very condition you want to eliminate through resistance. Every time you think I must fix this immediately, or I need to change that situation right now, you're unconsciously declaring the problem real and powerful. You're giving it the energy it needs to persist and even grow stronger in your experience and daily life. The secret lies in spiritual non-resistance, which is not passive acceptance or giving up responsibility. Instead, it's active recognition that the divine intelligence within you already knows the perfect solution and is working to reveal it when you stop interfering with your worried thoughts. When you release the mental grip of trying to control outcomes through force and manipulation, you create space for miracles to unfold naturally through the infinite wisdom that flows through your surrendered consciousness and transforms your entire life experience. Imagine a cork held underwater by someone's determined grip, fighting against the natural laws of physics. The harder they hold it down, the more powerfully it wants to rise to the surface where it naturally belongs. The moment they release their grasp, it shoots upward effortlessly through natural law. Your problems are like that submerged cork, and your worried efforts to solve them are the tight grip keeping them pressed down in your experience. Joel Goldsmith revealed that solutions exist in a dimension beyond human manipulation and mental effort, waiting to surface naturally. The divine mind already sees the perfect resolution to every challenge you face in this moment, but it can only manifest through your consciousness when you stop blocking its flow with desperate mental activity and controlling thoughts that create resistance to what wants to emerge. Release comes through practicing what Goldsmith called the art of spiritual letting go, a conscious withdrawal of your personal will so that infinite intelligence can work unobstructed in your affairs, bringing solutions that surpass anything your limited thinking could devise. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up responsibility for your life circumstances. Joel Goldsmith emphasized that non-resistance is actually the highest form of intelligent action because you're cooperating with laws greater than human understanding and limited perspective. When you stop trying to force solutions through willpower and manipulation, you begin receiving them through divine grace. When you stop pushing against obstacles with mental and physical effort, they begin dissolving naturally. This happens because you're no longer feeding discord with the energy of opposition and struggle. The practice is simple but profound in its transformative power. Whenever you catch yourself straining to fix something, pause and silently declare, "I do not know how to solve this challenge, but the infinite intelligence within me knows the perfect way forward." This shift from personal effort to spiritual receptivity opens channels for answers to flow through you rather than from you, bringing resolutions that surpass anything your limited thinking could have devised through human reasoning and past experience. Sarah had struggled with chronic anxiety for 12 long years, trying every technique, therapy, and medication available through conventional and alternative approaches. Nothing provided lasting relief until she discovered Joel Goldsmith's principle of non-resistance to her anxious thoughts and overwhelming emotions. Instead of fighting the anxiety or trying to think positive thoughts to overcome it, she began practicing spiritual surrender to what was happening in each moment. Each time panic arose, she would simply observe it without trying to change it or make it go away through mental manipulation. "I stopped being afraid of my fear," Sarah explains with tears of gratitude. "I realized that my desperate efforts to not be anxious were actually creating more anxiety in my system. The moment I stopped resisting the feeling, it began to lose its power over me completely." Within 6 weeks of this consistent daily practice, Sarah experienced her first anxiety-free day in over a decade. Today, 3 years later, she helps others discover the freedom that comes through non-resistant awareness and spiritual surrender to divine presence. Michael faced complete bankruptcy after his business partner disappeared with their company's assets, leaving him with overwhelming debt and legal complications. For months, he exhausted himself with legal battles, desperate networking, and frantic attempts to rebuild what was lost through sheer determination and endless effort. Following Goldsmith's teaching about spiritual surrender, Michael finally surrendered his grip on trying to control the outcome of his financial crisis. He continued taking practical steps, but released his attachment to specific results and timeline expectations that were creating stress. "The moment I stopped panicking about the future and trusted that somehow everything would work out according to divine plan, opportunities began appearing that I'd been too stressed to notice before." Michael shares about his remarkable transformation through spiritual principles. Within 4 months, an unexpected partnership emerged that not only restored his financial stability, but created greater prosperity than his original business had ever achieved through this spiritual approach of surrender and trust in divine intelligence. Lisa's marriage was deteriorating despite years of counseling, communication workshops, and self-help books promising to restore their relationship. She had tried everything to fix her marriage, but her efforts seemed to create more distance between her and her husband with each passing month. When she learned about Goldsmith's law of non-resistance, Lisa stopped trying to change her husband's behavior and focused on releasing her need for him to be different than he was. She practiced accepting him exactly as he was in each moment without judgment. "It felt terrifying at first because I thought acceptance meant giving up on our marriage," Lisa recalls with amazement. "But what happened was absolutely magical. As I stopped trying to control him, he began naturally becoming more loving and attentive without any effort on my part." The relationship that had been suffocating under the weight of her efforts to improve it began flourishing the moment she created space through spiritual non-resistance and unconditional acceptance of her husband's divine nature beneath his human personality. These transformations didn't happen overnight, but they began immediately when each person shifted from forcing outcomes to allowing divine intelligence to work. Joel Goldsmith taught that this principle works because resistance creates the very friction that sustains our problems in consciousness. When you stop feeding difficulties with the energy of opposition and mental struggle, they naturally dissolve back into the nothingness from which they came. Problems exist only in consciousness, and consciousness can be purified through non-resistant awareness and spiritual recognition of truth. The key is understanding that non-resistance doesn't mean inaction or passivity. It means inspired action that flows from peace rather than panic, from trust rather than fear, from spiritual wisdom rather than human desperation, and the need to control every outcome through personal will. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the primary practice of non-resistance, Joel Goldsmith taught complementary techniques that accelerate your spiritual transformation and deepen your understanding of divine principles. The first is what he called the practice of the presence, maintaining constant awareness of divine activity in your daily life. Throughout your day, silently acknowledge that infinite intelligence is operating in every situation you encounter, regardless of appearances. This isn't about thinking positive thoughts to change circumstances, but recognizing a spiritual reality that exists independent of material conditions and human opinions. When facing any challenge, instead of immediately strategizing solutions through human reasoning, pause and inwardly declare, God is present here as the only power and the only presence operating in this situation. I rest in this truth and allow it to manifest perfectly. This practice gradually trains your consciousness to look beyond appearances to the spiritual reality where all problems are already resolved, drawing those perfect solutions into your visible experience through recognition and spiritual receptivity to divine guidance. The second complementary practice is listening for the still, small voice, developing receptivity to divine guidance that surpasses human reasoning and past experience. This requires regular periods of inner stillness and attentive silence where you become receptive to spiritual wisdom. Goldsmith emphasized that answers come not through thinking harder about problems or analyzing them mentally, but through quieting the mind enough to receive wisdom that flows from beyond personal knowledge and limited understanding based on past experiences and human education. Set aside time daily to sit quietly and ask, what do I need to know about this situation? Then listen without trying to formulate answers through your intellect. Truth often comes as sudden knowing, unexpected insights, or peaceful certainty about next steps that feel completely natural. This practice develops your spiritual intuition until receiving divine guidance becomes as natural as breathing, providing solutions that logic alone could never reach through inner receptivity to the infinite intelligence that knows all things. The third technique is treatment through recognition, acknowledging spiritual truth about any person or situation that appears problematic in your experience. This transforms your perception and consequently changes your experience of that person or circumstance in remarkable ways. Instead of seeing sickness, recognize perfect health as spiritual reality. Instead of seeing lack, recognize infinite abundance as your divine inheritance. Instead of seeing discord, recognize underlying harmony as the truth about every relationship and situation you encounter in your daily life. When someone treats you unfairly, silently recognize their divine nature beneath the human personality that's acting out unconscious patterns. When finances seem limited, acknowledge the infinite supply that is your spiritual inheritance and birthright as a child of divine abundance. This practice of recognition gradually dissolves the mental concepts that create and sustain problems, replacing them with truth that manifests as improved conditions in your outer experience as consciousness changes and reflects new understanding. The fourth complementary practice is gratitude for what is not yet visible, giving thanks for solutions before they appear in material form. This demonstrates faith in spiritual law and accelerates manifestation by aligning your consciousness with divine activity already working on your behalf. Goldsmith taught that gratitude expressed in advance of visible improvement aligns your consciousness with the divine activity already working on your behalf behind the scenes of material appearance. This creates the mental atmosphere where miracles unfold naturally through grateful recognition. When facing financial pressure, give thanks for the abundance flowing toward you through channels you haven't yet discovered. When dealing with relationship conflict, appreciate the harmony being established beneath surface appearances. When experiencing illness, acknowledge the perfect health being revealed. This practice shifts you from hoping for change to expecting it with certainty, from begging for help to recognizing help already given, creating the mental atmosphere where miracles unfold naturally through grateful recognition of divine activity. Even with these powerful practices, you'll encounter common obstacles that can temporarily derail your progress on the spiritual path. The first challenge is the temptation to return to old patterns of forcing when spiritual methods seem slow to produce visible results. Your human mind, trained in effort and control through years of conditioning, will resist surrendering to processes it cannot understand or direct. When immediate results don't appear according to your timeline, doubt whispers that you should return to trying harder through human methods. Remember that spiritual law operates on divine timing, not human impatience or demand for instant gratification. Every moment of non-resistance is working invisibly to dissolve the mental foundations that created your problems in the first place, even when you cannot see progress happening. Trust the process even when you cannot see visible progress in your circumstances. Goldsmith reminded us that spiritual healing often works from the inside out, establishing inner transformation before outer circumstances reflect the change that's taking place in consciousness. The second obstacle is the fear that non-resistance means becoming passive or irresponsible about your life circumstances. Your practical mind worries that surrendering control will lead to worse problems or missed opportunities that could have been prevented through human effort and vigilance. Joel Goldsmith clarified that spiritual non-resistance actually enhances your effectiveness, because actions flowing from peace and divine guidance are far more powerful than those driven by anxiety and force. You become more effective, not less, when operating from spiritual principles. You continue taking necessary practical steps, but from a foundation of trust rather than desperation. You respond to situations rather than reacting from fear, allowing wisdom to direct your choices instead of panic and worry, controlling your decisions through emotional reactivity. This creates what Goldsmith called effortless effort, actions that feel natural and produce results that exceed what struggle and stress could ever accomplish through aligned spiritual activity that flows from inner peace and divine guidance. The third challenge occurs when people around you pressure you to do something about your problems through conventional methods. Family and friends, meaning well, may interpret your peaceful approach as denial or laziness because they don't understand spiritual principles. Others cannot understand spiritual principles they haven't experienced personally. Their concern comes from love, but their advice often leads back to the very patterns of force and worry that created your difficulties in the first place through resistance and mental struggle. Maintain your practice regardless of external pressure from well-meaning friends and family. Share Goldsmith's teachings only with those who show genuine interest and openness. Your results will eventually demonstrate the power of spiritual non-resistance to skeptical observers through your transformed life. Remember that you're pioneering a different way of living that challenges everything society teaches about problem-solving through force and control. Stay committed to principles that work rather than opinions that sound reasonable but lack spiritual understanding. The fourth obstacle is the tendency to use spiritual practices as another form of trying to get what you want, rather than surrendering to what life wants to give you through spiritual receptivity. This subtle form of spiritual materialism can block your progress completely. When you practice non-resistance while secretly hoping to manipulate outcomes for personal gain, you're still operating from personal will disguised as spiritual surrender. True freedom comes through releasing attachment to specific results and trusting divine intelligence completely. Goldsmith taught that the highest healing comes when you desire nothing but God's will, trusting that divine intelligence knows better than human reasoning what will bring lasting happiness and fulfillment to your life. This requires genuine surrender of personal preferences. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced practitioners learn to apply Goldsmith's principles in increasingly complex situations that test their spiritual understanding. Consider the challenge of dealing with difficult people who seem determined to create problems in your life through their unconscious behavior patterns. Instead of trying to change their behavior or protect yourself through conflict and defensive strategies, recognize that their actions reflect their level of consciousness, not truth about you. Maintain your spiritual center regardless of their choices and reactions to your peaceful presence. Silently know, this person's divine nature is untouched by their human personality, and unconscious patterns. I see them as God sees them, and I respond only to their spiritual reality, not their temporary appearances or behavioral manifestations that reflect their current level of understanding. This practice often produces surprising results as people respond positively to the spiritual recognition you hold of them, even when they're completely unaware of your inner work on their behalf. Your consciousness of their divine nature calls forth their highest expression naturally. Advanced application also includes using these principles in business and financial matters where competition and pressure often tempt us to compromise spiritual values. When facing professional challenges, avoid the temptation to secure outcomes through manipulation, pressure, or compromise of your integrity. Approach business relationships and financial decisions from spiritual principles of honesty, fairness, and service. Be trustworthy and honest, trusting that right action produces right results, even when competitive pressures suggest otherwise or when shortcuts seem more profitable. Joel Goldsmith's students often discovered that conducting business through spiritual integrity attracted better opportunities than those gained through worldly wisdom and strategic maneuvering could provide. Integrity becomes a magnet for right relationships and sustainable prosperity. Your reputation for reliability and spiritual consciousness becomes your greatest business asset, drawing people and opportunities that align with your elevated level of operations and ethical standards, creating lasting success based on spiritual principles rather than manipulation. Perhaps the most advanced application is practicing these principles during health crises, when fear naturally wants to take control. When facing serious illness, the temptation to panic and grasp for solutions can be overwhelming and completely understandable given human conditioning. Goldsmith taught that illness exists in consciousness before manifesting in the body, and healing occurs through recognizing the spiritual perfection that exists prior to and independent of physical appearances. This recognition gradually transforms the physical experience through changed consciousness. This doesn't mean avoiding medical care or being irresponsible about physical symptoms, but approaching treatment from spiritual foundation rather than fear-based desperation. Hold the recognition that divine life is the only life you have, while taking practical steps for physical care. Many of Goldsmith's students experienced remarkable healings by maintaining spiritual recognition while taking practical steps, allowing both spiritual and medical approaches to work together harmoniously without conflict or contradiction between spiritual practice and human responsibility. The ultimate advanced practice is living continuously from the recognition that problems don't actually exist in spiritual reality. Only in the mental concepts we hold about situations and circumstances based on appearances rather than truth about divine creation. This requires constant vigilance to catch yourself creating difficulties through mental activity and immediately returning to truth. Every problem becomes an opportunity to practice spiritual recognition rather than human reaction based on fear and limited understanding of spiritual law. Advanced practitioners eventually reach a state where their first response to any challenge is gratitude for another opportunity to prove spiritual law rather than concern about the situation itself. They see challenges as spiritual exercises rather than real problems requiring human solutions. This level of consciousness becomes a blessing to everyone around you as your peace and certainty inspire others and demonstrate practical spirituality in action through consistent divine recognition that transforms every situation through spiritual understanding. As you consistently practice Joel Goldsmith's law of non-resistance, your entire relationship with life transforms completely. You begin to see that what you once called problems were actually invitations to discover deeper spiritual truths about your divine nature and the nature of reality itself. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice surrender rather than a problem to solve. Every difficult person becomes a teacher, showing you where you still try to control rather than trust divine intelligence. Every setback becomes a setup for greater spiritual growth and understanding. You realize that life isn't happening to you but through you, and that your primary purpose isn't to solve problems, but to maintain consciousness of divine presence in every circumstance you encounter. This shifts you from victim to spiritual practitioner. This shift from problem solver to spiritual recognizer changes everything, because you're no longer at the mercy of conditions, but established in the truth that transcends all conditions through spiritual awareness and conscious recognition of divine presence. Your relationships transform dramatically as you stop trying to fix people and start seeing their spiritual perfection beneath their human struggles and unconscious patterns. Friends and family notice your increased peace and often ask what has changed in your life that brought such transformation. You become a source of stability for others, not by giving advice or trying to help through human methods, but simply by maintaining your spiritual center, regardless of the chaos around you, and reflecting divine peace that others can feel in your presence. People feel safe in your presence because you don't need them to be different than they are in this moment. Your acceptance creates space for their own natural transformation to unfold without pressure or judgment from you, allowing their divine nature to emerge naturally. This becomes your greatest gift to the world, being someone who demonstrates that inner peace is possible regardless of outer circumstances, inspiring others through example rather than words or effort to change them through spiritual presence. Financial abundance flows more easily because you're no longer blocking it with desperate need or trying to force it through manipulative schemes and anxiety-driven actions. You trust divine supply to manifest through appropriate channels that align with your spiritual growth and service. Health improves naturally because you're not sustaining illness through worry and resistance to what is. Work becomes more fulfilling because you're guided to opportunities that align with your spiritual growth and natural talents, rather than just pursuing money or status. Even mundane daily activities become opportunities to practice presence and gratitude instead of rushing through them while focused on future problems. You find joy in simple moments that you previously rushed through while focused on fixing future circumstances. Life becomes an adventure in discovering how spiritual principles apply to every situation rather than a burden of problems that need to be solved through human effort and endless struggle against what you cannot control through personal will. Today marks the beginning of your new understanding of how life actually works through spiritual law rather than human effort alone. Every time you catch yourself trying to force a solution, you'll remember Joel Goldsmith's revolutionary teaching about the power of spiritual non-resistance and divine intelligence. Every moment of surrender becomes a victory over the illusion that you must control life through personal will and effort. Every practice of recognition becomes a step toward the freedom that has always been your spiritual inheritance as a divine being having a human experience. You now possess the key that unlocks every door in your life. Stop trying to fix your life and start trusting the infinite intelligence that created you to guide your steps and provide everything you need for your highest good and spiritual growth. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.